We were just hearing from a CFTC commissioner herself about the desire to get some kind of rule of the road here as to what the SEC and CFTC should have the authority to regulate. The CoinShares CEO we were just speaking with also wants to see that defined. When do we expect that Congress will move on that?
Well, it's such an important question, and I think the consistency in the regulatory framework and the transparency so that investors and innovators and consumers all know the rules of the road will really help financial technology and blockchain develop here in the United States. So I think our priorities look like this. I think we want to pick up where we left off in the last Congress, consider the definition of digital assets and the idea of a stablecoin regime as a payment token. And then you're right. I think we need to look with our colleagues, both in the Senate and in the House Agriculture Committees, and make sure that we can develop a bright line test of what should be traded in an ag or commodity type environment versus something that's a security and under the regulation of the SEC. So these are big questions, and the Digital Assets Subcommittee is going to work to find the right answers in that framework.
Well, Congressman, you mentioned there that this needs to be addressed in both the House and the Senate, which clearly are under different leadership. How optimistic are you about the prospects for bipartisanship on some of these financial regulation issues?
Yeah, that too is an important question. Last year we saw good bipartisan cooperation, thinking through that definition of a digital assets, the regulatory framework for it, how to define a payment token and determine its transparency and collateral characteristics. That was done on a bipartisan basis. We had good cooperation and help from the Treasury Department. And I believe the collapse of FTX last fall has galvanized that interest in the Senate as well, which makes me optimistic that we can work together on a bipartisan basis and a bicameral basis and find the right policy solutions to help financial technology advance here in the U.S.
Representative, I'd love to know just generally your takeaways from the FTX fiasco, especially considering that Sam Bankman-Fried was so widely consulted on Capitol Hill and that he funded so many campaigns.
Yeah, well, I think FTX showed us that investors of all levels of sophistication don't have the right information to make decisions around this industry, whether you were talking about a lending transaction or a direct investment transaction. Those both were systematically failures when it came to Alameda and FTX. There are now 1 million creditors associated with the FTX bankruptcy filing. And on your point about the political contributions, I noted that the Southern District of New York also had in their prosecution list of charges the willingness to look at the Federal Election Commission law violations as well. So I think all this will come out in the investigation. And we still would like to have, in addition to John Ray, we would love to have Sam Bankman-Fried testify before the committee and tell us how the FTX saga unwound and what we can learn from that so that we can learn how to put the right regulatory framework in place.
Does it delay, Representative, any possibility of, for example, legislation, even specific legislation, say on stablecoins, getting passed this year?
I don't think it delays it. I think what we saw in the FTX situation and the bankruptcy, it's going to be very informative to members of Congress and senators that are working on this, but it's not going to delay our collaborating together to propose a regulatory framework that we believe has a solid foundation so that America can be an innovator in the financial technology space and the use of blockchain.
There is a line, though, between allowing innovation to continue to foster and implementing consumer protection. And arguably, the U.S. is far behind other countries in that regard. As you look at what regulators are doing thus far, the actions we have seen from the SEC Chairman Gary Gensler, are you satisfied with what you are seeing? Because we often hear it described on this show as regulation by enforcement.
Right. No, I don't think, I won't speak for every member of Congress, but I think generally House Republicans on the Financial Services Committee are not remotely satisfied with the actions of the SEC over the past year. Chair Gensler told us he was the cop on the beat last year, He told us he didn't need additional authorities to oversee the emerging financial technology and token business. And in fact, obviously he did, because FTX fully collapsed on his watch. And so we want to get answers to what were the CFTC and the SEC doing during the course of 2022 in the payment tokens and stable coins that collapsed during that year, and then the ultimate collapse of FTX. So what contact did they have with those companies? What were their operating philosophies about overseeing that business as it related to American investors?
You don't have to wait for information from Gary Gensler, from the investigation. Obviously, in Congress, you have a lot of influence, and you have a link, I believe, on the committee's site for example, whistleblower tips. Are you hearing of anything else? Are you getting any whistleblower tips?
Well, we've just begun organizing for this Congress, and I can't answer the question about whistleblower tips, but I can assure you that my colleagues and I are discussing what's the right approach to the regulators as it relates to what happened in the last year and how do we want to proceed, and you'll see us do that over the coming weeks.